And I thought, that's living tissue in action. So how about I teach my tissue that already knows how to self-regulate, how to self-heal, and how to reorganize and secrete what's necessary within itself. What if I create a workout sequence or a movement sequence that stimulates that to the very best it can possibly be for the person who needs it?
Today's conversation is one of those that keeps unfolding long after it ends. I'm sitting down with Paul Thornley, one of my teachers for Myofascial Magic in Action, and someone who truly changed the way I understand movement, breath, and the body as a living system. This episode is curious and deeply eye-opening. We talk about why strong bodies still get injured, why micro-movement matters, why linearity is the thing of the past, and how rotation, breath, and awareness restore energy instead of draining it. If you've ever felt like you're doing all the right things, but something still feels off in your body, this conversation might land in a powerful way. Let's get into it. Hey, I'm so excited to be speaking with Paul Thornley today, one of my teachers from a program I just recently completed called MMIA, Myofascial Magic in Action.
Exactly.
Welcome, Paul.
Thanks for the invitation, Natalie, and shoot away and ask anything you like. It was great to spend some time with you and see your interpretation of how we challenge you for what reasons we challenge you in the first place.
I'd love to give my listeners a little bit of a background about you, who you are, what methodologies you practice. I know you're a Pilates teacher. Let's go into your background.
Oh, yeah. I'm an old man now. I'm 55 this year, and I've been in this industry. I'll go a little bit further back. I've always done martial arts my whole life. But my passion was to join the military in the UK, which I did from quite a young age. And I got a really bad injury. I wasn't 17. I got a very bad injury, and it puzzled me. I thought, wow, I'm really fit. I do all the sports. I'm on all the teams at school, but I really hurt myself just training. I didn't fall over. Nobody hit me. It was just the training that really ruined my knee. Anyway, I came out and I did the usual rehabilitation as you do. And then I joined again 3 years later when I'd finished growing. I'd become a little bit more larger. As you said, I was quite small anyway, but I almost filled into myself. But my damage I'd done in that 3 years prior had really left a mark on my knee internally. There's a lot of scar tissue that I wasn't unaware of. So when I went to join again, they did an arthroposcopy, which is where they look at it. And they went, we'd love you to come back in the military. You're clearly the right character for our environment and for this role. However, that knee will not last. We don't want to set you up to fail. Even though as fit as you've arrived, the training that you're going to embark upon will be too severe because it was a year-long training. It was with one of the elite branches of the military. And they said, it's not that you can't do it. Your knee will just be unable to sustain that level of training because of the damage it sustained earlier. And that really got up my goat, let me tell you. That was a dream bubble burst, and I'd really prepared well. However, I took my plan B option. I still joined the military, but a much less intense branch. I got in the military and I had a lovely time. I made some very brilliant lifelong friends and I had a good career. But it just was always that lingering shadow of what have I done to myself and why is that? Why does that happen? So long story short, I left the military. I did a little bit of time refueling airplanes for Shell in the Republic of Ireland. I had a great time in Ireland with my first wife. I had 2 great kids. However, that relationship started to dwindle out, and I was looking to do something more meaningful because I had a great job with lots of good money. Refueling is very well paid. But my God, it's boring. There's just nothing to stimulate the brain cells at all. And that's okay. You get a good pension, you get lots of benefits. But I was only 30 at that stage. And I thought, if this is my life, and because all of my colleagues were in their late 60s, early 70s, and I was the youngest of the bunch, I thought, wow, if I stay here one more day, and I'd been there 7 years, if I was there one more day, this is it. And I thought, I've got to do something about this. So I don't know if it was brave or stupid or courageous or just throwing caution to the wind. I retired from a very well-paid job and thought, I need to do something more meaningful for myself and for my children so I can be with them more. Anyway, so I did. I went back to, not college per se, because I'm not academically replete in certificates. I have very little academic recognition. But I went to night school and did personal training. But the question in my mind was, if training is so good for you, why did I get hurt? And I was training with the best in the world. So anyway, so I did that course. It was 6 months personal training course. And I got on really well with the tutor, and he saw my frustration. And we were learning anatomy as you do, your traditional classical anatomy based on the 17th century understanding of a human body in a book. And he said, "What's wrong?" I said, "This doesn't make sense. We're not flat pieces of paper. And this is not ringing true with me. And I'm getting very confused. And if I do this exercise, it targets this muscle. But why does it have this effect on this side of my body, not the side of the paper that it's printed on?" He brought in a leg of lamb, and my world opened up then because I could see things three-dimensionally. And I went, okay, that makes more sense. So now I could see the relationship with tissue in relationship to where it was around a particular bone, and how that then had a much different effect on various aspects as it moved on the wholeness of the bone, not just that two-dimensional view of front and back. So I really flew through that course. I started to enjoy it then, and it made more sense. And what I took from that course, and it was only 6 months, it was only an introduction, right, to personal training, but it was crystal clear why we get hurt in gyms, because everything about that environment is linear. Everything's about doing things in straight lines, matching the copy and paste of agonist and antagonist, and sagittal, coronal, and transverse planes of movement, like we are a machine, hence the name biomechanical, or based on a carpentry project. Things must be in these angles and ranges of movement. And it just made absolutely no sense to me, having had a lifetime of experience of martial arts where everything is in the round. So again, back to the same tutor, he was super nice to me. He saw my frustration. He says, "Listen, Paul, if you stay in this industry, you're largely going to be a cleaner in the gyms, or you'll be going to be teaching group classes." And he said, "That's good fun. It's great to get your experience and meet lots of people." He says, "But you really are quite good at the anatomy. You've taken hold of it quite well. And I think you'll get more out of it if you take that educational thread further." So he introduced me then to John Sharkey, who's a Europe's clinical anatomist based in Ireland. And he'd only just begun, I didn't know this at the time, but a course called neuromuscular therapy. So neuromuscular therapy is basically based from his work, John's work, and Leon Chaitow, who was an osteopath at the time. They created this course. So a lot of the techniques were osteopathic based, and it went from a certification of nearly 2 years, then the advanced diploma, which was a further 2.5 years. So a grand total of 4.5 years, but without a thesis. So you got a high diploma, but it was part-time. It suited my lifestyle, and I began that journey. And what really suited me, because you have to go for a pre-interview first, right, to see if you're suitable and if you're a good character for their course and vice versa. And he just echoed everything I'd learned on that course about why the gym was not the right place to move. And the way I'd learned anatomy with that leg of lamb, he went, "You're going to really enjoy this because there are no muscles in the body. They're just labeled locations that we identified as structurally important for a conversation. But we go from a place with a fascial lens." And I went, "What are you talking about?" And my head, when just that curiosity goes, whoosh. Okay, this sounds fun. This is exciting. I'm not going to just come and copy and paste and memorize something and then regurgitate it in 18 months' time, 2 years as an exam. They want us to learn about it, interact with it, palpate it, understand what we're feeling and how we influence it with our touch and with our collaboration with the person that we are lucky enough to help either address a movement issue or help them have a better aspiration or a movement goal. So I began. And once I began that journey, every single course, every module of that course was brilliant. You were just blown away. Like you said, you were blown away in the course that you took part on with us. We had that every single module. And we worked with some amazing people who really allowed us to elaborate our learning. That it wasn't conformative. You were allowed to question it, because the more you questioned it, the better you understood it. And then you had a better conversation when you were asking questions to find certain solutions that you were confused about. They didn't spoon feed you. They taught you to ask the right questions to create the right dialogue so you can unravel the mystery of why people get injured and then almost form appropriate, what's the word I'm looking for? Experience of finding a solution that might not suit everybody, it might suit that person. It was very different. And I thought, this is awesome. So anyway, I did that. And on the way of doing that, they said, one thing to do it with your hands and really get involved. But if you can teach somebody how to interpret based on your interpretation of their movement issues, which is why they're accumulating these strains and creating these pathologies that need us to help them. If you can identify their movement issue, that is this repetitive, dysfunctional approach to their living tissue, and you could re-educate them, they wouldn't need you. And I thought, how about that? What if we take this stream of people that are constantly being dragged out and dealt with by rehabilitation, pharmacy, and surgery, and go upstream and avoid people jumping in that stream of disappointment and inconvenience and pain and discomfort, and head them off in a different direction by just clearly explaining to them how, if they move differently, they wouldn't create these situations? Wouldn't that be something different? So that's what I've been doing now for the last 25 years, is trying to make the medical world unnecessary by helping people understand their movement style based upon their unique form of themselves and maximize its optimization so they can use it without suffering the consequences of using it poorly. And if they do suffer the consequences of life and falling over and getting an injury, which happens, that if you educate them in a certain way, their recovery is so much faster, and it's almost self-recovery. They need minimal intervention or interference by a third party, be that a set of hands or some medication. But at all costs, try to avoid the surgical end game. And that's been my mission for most of my now career, this last 25, nearly 30 years. Because it's like, I know we want to be fitter, we want to have more longevity, we want to enjoy our lives and our families for longer. But the simple fact of the matter is, we don't. We don't live longer. We live longer because of medicine. The average age is 80 for a man and 83 for a woman of their average age, give or take a decade, whether they exercise or not. But the quality of life depends on how you use the quality of movement you ask your body to perform, whether that's at a very sedentary level or a very daily activity level or an elite athlete level. There's variations on the spectrum, but there's a consequence to how you use it, good, bad, or ugly. And if you want to have longevity of choice, knowing what you do and how you do it, you'll then be able to predict and anticipate the outcome of doing it quicker and recover from it. So you thereby do it for longer. Rather than just be ignorant to the effects and the ramifications and do it regardless, and then all of a sudden be really disappointed when your body fails you. And what it did, it started to answer that question: why did I get injured being trained by some of the best trainers on the planet in one of the most elite units in the planet? But I got injured when I was doing everything they told me. And it's because I started to understand the living ingredients that I'm made of and how they responded to the pressures that were being imposed upon them too early.
With your movement today, the movement practices that you've been practicing for many years, over 20, 25 years, how is your knee today?
Manageable. It doesn't limit me doing anything, but occasionally it reminds me that it's not great. Like, I'm warding off osteoarthritis. I don't have any limitation in it, except my chosen hobby that I've been doing for the last now 8 years is jujitsu. And a requirement of that is a lot of agility, a lot of twisting. The idea is to immobilize your opponent. And I try to not give them my leg to abuse further. I'm quite defensive of that leg because it's gone through enough trauma. But also when you're applying techniques upon somebody else, it's quite a violent dance, basically, is what jiu-jitsu is. Between friends, because we always smile and bump fists and say, thanks very much for the roll. But I'm aware of my limitations of my knee. Like, it does not like to do extreme flexion because of the scar tissue that's inside. So there's a thing called a triangle where you basically squeeze somebody's head off their shoulders with your legs. I've had to adapt that. And what the process of learning that skill over the 8 years, it's fascinating because there is not a one-fits-all approach to all of the techniques that are available. And there are a million variations. However, what it means is no matter what shape, size, or ability you are biased towards, it really suits everybody. There's a way for everybody to access these movement options, become very competent at them, and apply them in an appropriate way from you to somebody else, another living creature. And have fun problem solving in the moment against somebody else who's also going through the same process of problem solving instantaneously. And we keep ruining each other's problem solving. because we create another problem that they've just solved, and then we jig it up again and we give them something else to think about. And what it's done is made me be quite alert, really sharp. And I recognize where my bias is, the things I like to do, and where my weakness is, where my limitation is, or where their opportunity lies. And you become really good at guarding yourself or not making yourself as vulnerable as you might perhaps do if you weren't aware of those two elements.
Yeah, it sounds like you've become a really good listener to your body. And it's something I believe that has maybe inspired MMIA of these micro movements, like to move small. We learn so much more. And I'd love for you to talk about this approach. Is it something that inspired this approach, or chicken or the egg? What came first?
So that's exactly the right question. What came first? My injury came first, and I was ignorant to why I got injured and why I didn't heal as fast as I wanted to, and why the healing that did occur wasn't sufficient. So I then, over the last 25 years of learning in this field directly, having access to as many cadavers as I'd like, as many bodies as I'd like, and as many of the experts, because I'm good friends with a lot of the researchers, I was able to ask these questions and understand what are the ingredients that make us alive in nature, rather than what is this academic book tells me I am. And it let me think outside of the book and have a much more intelligent conversation with the people who put the words in the book, but understand how that translates to a human being trying to be human. And when I realized the ingredients are not in the book, just the form and the interpretation of the ingredients is in there, but the reality as they all collaborate and coordinate and harmonize every day without being separated into their various parts and pieces we created, when you understand the very subtle nature of them, that we are quite a vulnerable thing. But we can be ruthless, and we can be very tough, and we can feel we're invulnerable, and we can feel we're very robust in nature. We're actually quite fragile. It can be over in the blink of an eye, just by twisting your ankle or getting run over by a bus. I mean, everything from one end to the other, right? You can get a scratch, or it can be over. However, understanding those processes that the body goes through really made me question why we do what we do so frequently to attain the longevity we all want, but we often become victim of seeking that longevity in the way we go about it. So when you think of us like an instrument, again, like going back to the ingredients, we are a very finely tuned instrument. So if you take that analogy to instruments, like we know in an orchestra, they don't play them until they've tuned them. And those tuning events are really weird and noisy, and they don't sound in tune, do they, as they try to tune it? It's quite chaotic. But they're all very small adjustments of the elements that make the instrument playable between the instrument and the person who is holding it. And I thought, if what I believe to be true is true, I've got to use myself as an experiment, which is why I got then into jujitsu properly and thought, I'll use this as an opportunity to self-experiment, because it's one of the most violent, traumatic things I've ever done to my body is jujitsu. Speak to any jujitsu practitioner that does it, you walk out of there feeling violated to your soul. And that's on a good day. So on a bad day, it's worse, right?
Fine tuning equals violent aggression.
Yeah. Well, when you're with it, it's honestly, I can only explain it like this. When you're with somebody who's very competent, who understands the body's movement and how they can manipulate you and utilize you, and these are the senior grades that have been doing it for a minimum of 10 to 15 years, they're so highly professionally competent, you are unable to have any influence on the outcome of the story. I can't tell you how humbling that sensation is when you are at the mercy of somebody else's determination and skill set. It's akin to watching a cat playing with a ball of wool and realizing you're the ball of wool.
Wow, that hits deep.
Yeah. You go, oh my God, no matter what I do, it's up to them to decide how they allow me to progress or to stop or to have a learning experience or to be punished. It's entirely up to that senior grade. And I thought, wow, this is powerful. This is powerful. And then you see them teaching, those same people teaching it to kids at a very gentle way. Really, they have poison in their hands. They are lethal hands, what they do. Their techniques are unbelievable. And you see them apply them on adults very aggressively, really powerfully, like it's lethal. But then you see them apply it to children. Or babies, they're super fragile, but super confident, full of life, full of vitality. And these same practitioners are taking this art that they've developed over a few decades of their life and they've committed to it. And then they're teaching it to the youthful part of the academy in the most softest, most delicate way and showing them how you can apply these incredible techniques and these different movement sequences that really truly immobilize another person. And they cannot do anything about it unless they're taught the counter to it, which again is an old story of problem solving, but you don't need to be so violent. And I thought, that's living tissue in action. So how about I teach my tissue that already knows how to self-regulate, how to self-heal, and how to reorganize and secrete what's necessary within itself. What if I create a workout sequence or a movement sequence that stimulates that to the very best it can possibly be for the person who needs it? So I started to play and experiment with dosage and intensities and movement distances and movement rotational sequences. And honestly, I promise you, I put it to practice every day and I recover every day. So I go tomorrow pain-free.
I love that. I love that in MMIA, you're giving us the tools to problem solve in our own bodies so that we don't have to trust the external more than we trust the internal, and also not have these big restrictions put on us. You'll never be able to use your knee again. It's no, actually, I'm not going to take that as the final. I'm going to work on myself in these micro ways to improve how my body moves every day and restore energy. One of the things that blew my mind in the MMIA training is that as a Pilates teacher, you said there is no such thing as the core.
Yeah.
And I would love for my listeners to understand the principle behind that. Why is there no such thing as the core?
We call it the mythical core in a workshop we created to address this issue. Because again, like I said at the beginning, when you learn your classical anatomy, you're taught about the body in segments. And then those segments are given a responsibility and a role within your life, within your lifestyle, and within your movement preferences. And in the world of Pilates, of movement, we have to have this strong core because it's known as the powerhouse. And why did they think they brought their attention to it? Because it's one of the most vulnerable areas in the body. Because it's where all movement really moves from and through. So it has a lot of responsibility because it can move in all directions, but it's also where all your vulnerable intestinal organs are. So what we want to know is, if we identify and core, we make the core. If we had to take a skeleton and create one, we would need a diaphragm for the roof. We need a mythical pelvic floor for the base. We would then need your transverse abdominis to wrap around towards the lower back, and you then filter it into the multifidi and rotators, which would have this lovely thoracolumbar fascia wrapping and draped across that. And that would bring it all the way around to the aponeurosis of the front, where you have this lovely skirt and now this hula hoop of tissue around. And now you have your core. And the harder that is, the more protected and stronger you have become. And of course, it's very fashionable to have athletic abs. So they're visually pleasing. You have this lovely tight waist, like we have the Victorian corset. We now have to create one of those ourselves because we don't wear the same clothes anymore. We don't have the corset, our shaped figure, but people find it attractive. And if we burn away the fat and we burn it off as much as we can, then we reduce ourselves and our shape to the conformity of our skeletal system. That's then considered healthy. But let's address that. Let's do that. Let's just do that. Let's make that as hard as it can be. If you are making your body so hard in one area that's meant to be hypermobile, it's meant to have hyper capabilities of moving in all directions. So you can change directions at will, at demand, when necessary, at a variety of speeds in a variety of situations, both loaded and unloaded, both horizontal and vertical, and every angle in between. How are you going to do that when it's so hard? Like it becomes immobilized. And then the big word came about creating stability, stabilize the core, which created has been, in my opinion, overwhelmingly has turned out to be a restriction of movement of that area. Yes, so that you can protect it against movement from that and superficial from that area. When we move our legs or we move our arms or we lift or squat or do any other activities, as if we are protecting ourselves against ourselves. That makes no sense at all. Because when you keep something still that contains all of those elements I described, they're all about breathing. And if your breathing becomes inhibited because you contain this area so firm that it can't move and it can't harmonize during movement and it can't adapt through movement, in movement, then how does that become functional? It becomes and creates dysfunction. And you'll notice that with clients in Pilates, breathing, although it's a primary principle, is often an afterthought. Clients don't give it that much value because they don't value something they don't need until they need it. Until something is becoming inconvenient and somebody says, if I improve your breathing, this will dissipate this issue. And you go, but I created this issue here because I didn't focus on that breathing.
Mm.
And it becomes environmentally biased. So it's very important that I know Pilates has become very fashionable because it helps target the core. It's a key selling point, but it's also our Achilles heel because then people are getting hurt unnecessarily. We are setting their bodies up to become dysfunctional by abusing the very method that should prevent these pathologies arising in the first place.
How is breath, should say, big, deep breath, how does it organize the body? Why is it so important to the body?
Without breathing, you die. And people don't value breathing. And so your capacity to breathe is what stimulates your ability to move freely. So think of it, if you're frightened, do you breathe freely or anxiously? Is it a long breath or a shallow, short breath? For anybody who's gone scuba diving, if you don't manage your breath, you panic. Or if you're in the water and you panic, you're likely to drown. Well, on Earth, when we panic in breath, we suffocate. They're both the same thing. Remember, we were born from the sea. We are salty when you lick us. We are of exactly the same environmentally influenced being. We need to be able to breathe so that we can function well. And yet the activities we love to perform often take our breath away. They often stifle our ability to breathe freely because of that. Like, for instance, if we go back to the core, you make that hard, try breathing long and meaningfully. It'll be short, sharp, or it'll be a held breath. And anything where you create a container, like if I have this container and I fill it with air and enough air, that air will create a volume inside the limitation of the container. What if I then compress that air? It's got nowhere to go except out of here. So how does it evacuate from here? It will rupture something. It has to, unless I have a valve that will open it and allow the air to depressurize the structure. In a human being, we cue intra-abdominal pressure all the time. Create intra-abdominal pressure by stabilizing the lumbar and pelvic region, engage diaphragmatic and pelvic floor to stabilize the lumbar and create that supportive network. That means you've increased the pressure and it's got to come out of somewhere. And if we're not breathing out of your mouth, it will then come out of another orifice. And if it doesn't come out of there, it will rupture out of the very thing you have hardened. Like a balloon burst, it will definitely come out. And this is what happens to people, is why they become incontinent earlier. I have clients that were in their 60s who were incontinent. Now my clients are in their 20s because they're over core training. They're over stimulating a restriction that creates pathology of their body. Make sense?
100% it makes sense. I think the high pressure, low pressure system makes the most sense. And it's even to the point where these really tight jeans that women wear that always constrict their abdominal can create even that rupture at some point.
We are not meant to be over compressed at all. And that's why we explain, like you experienced on the course, there are certain principles you should understand about anatomy and why our understanding of the physiology has changed over time. Because we understand it clearer now. Yeah, there's still a lot we don't understand, but what we do understand is a lot clearer. And we have better ways of explaining it. And that's where the understanding of tensegrity is very important. And that's those living forces that are invisible, like air is invisible. How do you know you're breathing in oxygen? How do you know that there's nitrogen or carbon dioxide? Because it's invisible. But because we've got science that is really awesome, that helps us answer some of these mythical, mysterious questions, that we have answers to what we don't know. And the same with what we understand about the body now. Now we know that we're not mechanical, that we're not a puppet like Pinocchio with somebody pulling the strings and making muscles move bones. We know, like you just said there, we are a volume that is pressurized. And that volume is contained within our cells in our own form and our own shape. Now, the more we challenge that volume, the more we challenge where those pressures go. And pressure has to alleviate itself out of the body so it maintains and regulates just the right amount of pressure to move very efficiently without compromising structural integrity. But if we embrace it and immobilize it and overpressurize it, that pressure must go somewhere. And it often creates issues that we invited because of repetitively immobilizing ourselves in the attainment of dysfunctional strength in a part of us. So the core of the human body is the spine. The spine is the core, if we have to have a core, but that runs from your bottom to the top of your head. Now, make that strong, make that vibrant, make that pliable, make that more capable. Okay, now we have to have a very different approach, but it's still within the same volume. Volume doesn't get bigger or smaller. It stays the same in the same containment of your body, which is often why people say the fascia is the scaffolding of the body. But scaffolding doesn't move. When you put scaffolding up around a building, it stays there while you build something. But fascia is not stable. It is always in motion. It is always being asked to adapt to the forces that are within it. So much better to recognize the reality of what we are, which is an ocean-born fluid system. Yes, look at any baby. I mean, embryology shows us that we are fluid within fluid, but it's just variations of densification, specialization, and spatialization of those elements within a fluid-based organism.
Mm-hmm. I've heard you, I'm going to paraphrase because I've heard you speak about the vertebral column and say like, how can it be a column if it lives in a bio-emotional body?
Yes. Remember, why did they call it a column? Think of why our forefathers and these historical geniuses of the day, why they came up with these terms. So a column was because it was lying, it was dead, and it looked like a set of bricks that were stacked against each other. Because remember, when you do anatomy of the dead, it can't move. You dictate its positional reference. You decide where things are, and you can describe it, but you often use the language of the day or whatever is the preference of the day. And in the days when we were being given and creating this language to explain the human form, they used the language of the day, which was the Industrial Revolution. Yes, they wanted to know about beams and columns. Right? We talk about the muscle. But what does muscle mean? It means little mouse. Because as he was assessing a muscle, a mouse ran under the floor, under a rug, and it rippled in the same way. So because it's familiar to the day and it represented what he saw on the floor to what he was seeing in the cadaver, he called it muscle, meaning little mouse.
That's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so again, understanding the etymology of words and why words mean something is important, how we then describe what they truly mean, which is why we've evolved. It's why scientists challenge, what does fascia mean? Fascia means wrapping or binding or dissectable sheath, because that's what it was called centuries ago, because that's what it looked like at the time based on their ability to test it, examine it, and explore it. And it looked like a wrapping. But we now know it is the architectural fabric that everything grows within. It's not a system. It's the very thing we are. From the skin that we see to the bones that we feel and to the senses that explain how we feel throughout any interaction throughout the day. It's all a variation of fascia.
I love that. One of the things that you also talk about in the training is rotation and how rotation can restore energy and replenish energy in the body. It's free energy. We talk a little bit about that and why rotation is so important for the spine and the body.
For sure. Where do we live, Natalie? We live on Earth, which is spiraling at 18 miles a second in a spiraling universe that is constantly in motion and expanding. So once you understand the environment we exist upon, which we came from within, all the elements that make every human is here on Earth. We are all the ingredients to all of the periodic table is within us. So that means if our surface and our environment is spiraling, then our movement must be of a spiraling nature. Look at any animal in nature, it always moves side to side in the round. Everything is round on a round spiraling planet, on a round Earth. So what you do, you go, why do we take away roundness? Because it's easy to make people conform like the military. Because all training and exercise came from fighting and dancing and conformity to whatever policy and whatever authority was in charge in the day. So what happens is we remove the roundness and make people go in straight lines, because it means we can conform, make people queue up, make people wait in line to buy products and produce, make them do trading in lines. In a bank, it's a bank vault. Makes sense? Whereas in reality, to go get something off a tree, you have to turn it to pull it off, pull the fruit off, go chase after the cattle or the buffalo. Yes, ride on your horse, run. Try to run without moving your arms. It's really funny. Makes sense? Try to walk with any purpose on uneven ground without turning. It's impossible. You will trip yourself up. So what we know is everything that's living wants to be at ground level, including humans. Yes. The only thing that flies, yes, always come down to land on something that's at ground, on the ground. So everything is coming down, whether you call that gravity, utilizing and coordinated with ground force reaction, or you call it electromagnetic field, or whatever your bias to science is. We are meant to be on the ground. So our spines spiral from the ground to the ground, which is why as a baby, we don't walk initially. We lie and we learn to stand up and we learn to develop our integrity of movement and strength by trying to get up from the ground to the ceiling, to the sky, to our environment and architectural bias, which is to be vertical so we can move. Because remember, we have 2 legs, not 4. So to move, we have to know how to get up. But make no mistake about it, our body, when it feels under any trauma or any threat, it will duck and dive down to the floor again. Now, how do you do that? The spine turns. If to get to the floor, we did it like a linear exercise routine, you would fall over like a plank. You would just fall dead straight. That's ridiculous to say. People only do that when they faint or they're unconscious. And most people, when they do this, they fall in on themselves. They fold away. So it makes sense if you look at everything about us on this thing, our fingers, your glasses, your eyes, your head, my chest, everything is round. So it must be encouraged to move in the shape that it is. And if we can understand how those counter-rotational forces that exist within the known universe, on the planet we live in, and in our bodies, if we can harness them properly, we will move a lot more efficiently for a lot longer than we think.
So incredible. This is off topic, but it'll hopefully make sense. What it makes me think of is when we flex, we go into more parasympathetic tone. And when we extend, we go into more sympathetic tone. So even as we're learning to stand, we're learning how to balance our nervous system in these micro movement ways.
But I'll tell you this, imagine a car backfires. What shape do you create? You curl up like a ball. Curling up like a ball, a parasympathetic effect. Sympathetic is the active, is the fight or flight or responsive. Yes, bang, because you are now defensive. Whereas parasympathetic is calming and relaxing, but a thoughtful calmness. Yes, not a passive calmness. So that may or may not be true what you've said, but think about how the body responds to natural influences from environment, from personalities, from activities, from your own sense of well-being. So sympathetic nervous system, there's 4 things we need to understand. We do fight and we certainly flight, but we also freeze and we also fawn. And these are 4 important differential emotional responses to joy or threat. And we need to, like I say, when you're, for instance, in my environment, when I'm doing jiu-jitsu, if the calmer you are, the easier you problem solve. So the more somebody's imposing themselves upon me, whether in that is a physical environment, It might be an emotional one in a family. It might be a job responsibility at work. If I'm being imposed upon, how I can calm and stay relative to a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, and I know how to perform and respond properly in a timely way, then I manage threat. If I manage threat inefficiently, you then change your interoceptive qualities, which is your self of well-being. And most people live in anxiety these days because people are always being judged. Somebody's always got an opinion about you. People are always saying things that you either disagree or agree with, but people always get offended. And people are always feeling like that themselves are being observed and somebody's having a conversation about them in some meaningful way or another. But it's how you manage this environment we call home. And that's why movement is so good and why micro movement is so good, because it gives you time to reflect upon your behavior, your personality. So that's where breath is even more important, because if you understand the quality of breath and how breath can influence your parasympathetic system more appropriately, it helps you calm down when you need to most, but not calm and be passive and more vulnerable, but calm and be alert to make better decisions, whether they are a movement one or a mental one or a spiritual choice. Because most people make bad decisions these days in haste, rather than having a bit of time frame to wait. Because again, it's like why we think micro movement is so important, because you micromanage the micro effect, which is going to have a macro influence. But if we always deal in the macro, you never get to refine anything. And that's akin to having a really bad budget and you keep spending more than you earn or that more than you have available, but then keep getting an overdraft to pay for that poor budgetary effect. And you feel rich for a while and you're managing for a while until the overdraft runs out and you're now in double debt. So you go and get a bigger overdraft. And that's what people keep doing with their movement and their emotional well-being. They keep spending more than they have acquired and accumulated in themselves. And that's why we end up in these predicaments. Instead of being more thoughtful about movement, about the environment, who we share our time with, and what we do when we're sharing our time with somebody or somewhere, because it's important we accumulate that peace of mind and our ability to understand the effect of it on our body, not only structurally, but the visceral nature of it. Like, we are only alive because we have a lovely heart that has a nice rhythm. Yes, we have to make sure that this symbiotic relationship with all of our organs is harmonized in a way that they filter all of the stresses and all of the pressures and all of the fluids that make us alive and well. But we tend to give them little thought until they become dysfunctional. And now our mind then focuses on the dysfunctional outcome, not what created that dysfunctional outcome.
So we need to get to the root.
You need to know the story. We all have a story, no? Life is a story. And whatever chapter you are in your book of your story, you're still the author of what's to come. Individually, you don't need somebody else to edit your story for you. However, if you're brave enough and vulnerable enough and you're willing enough, you come to the people like me and you, and we will listen to somebody's story. We'll understand the patterns within the story that have led them to require our attention or our guidance. And we help them rewrite the next subsequent chapters to what they would like to happen. What changes and adaptations are they willing to make? Which is why if you do it in the micro, you're going to make really significant changes that are achievable and attainable and sustainable. But most people want big changes too fast, which is unrealistic and often fails more than it ever succeeds.
Yes.
It's that willingness, it's the willingness to delete things. This is a hard conversation to have with people, but especially if it's a movement issue or a lifestyle issue or an emotional issue or the spiritual element, whatever it is, whatever floats your boat. But knowing how to delete unnecessary trauma, stress, and energy out of your life takes a brave decision. But the relief once you've done it it's unmeasurable, because you just feel a relief of everything, every aspect of your life. Well, immediately improves all of things that we've become accustomed to holding on to because of loyalty, because of responsibility, because of necessity, because we want certainty in our lives, because we don't feel we have to let people down, including ourselves and other members of our family, friends, and colleagues. We tend to hold on to things that are not serving us well. And we try to make these massive changes instead of going, that's not going to work.
But so much of how we live is subconscious. Like you're saying, if you keep accruing debt, you don't even have the chance to look at things because the
Correct.
things you do are no longer in your conscious
You
mind.
become overwhelmed, don't you, by the here and now, not what's happening in reality. Big question I have on a lot of these chats that we tend to get invited to is the world does not like to face reality.
Mm.
We want to have an interpretation of perspective reality, where we're comfortable, a conversation of convenience, a conversation that suits the moment. But when you face reality, you make much more significant impact on yourself and others.
Mm.
And a lot of that people don't want to face because it's hard to do it. But once you're comfortable doing it, life is very different. It becomes less fake and less disingenuous, it becomes more authentic. And now your movement choices become different. Look at the people we see in our course and generally in life now. People are coming to our Pilates classes, the fitness arena and the yoga world, all of the modalities that are out there. The vast majority are younger. Yeah, they want high intensity. Yes?
Yeah.
But the people that come to us later, the black sheep, the ones that are not following the herd mentality, they want a more educated version of movement. But they've had the lifestyle, they've had the experiences of it not going right. Yes, I got short-term gains, but I'm now in long-term dysfunction, long-term pain. I have long-term inconvenience. Can you help me? Now we have to have a very different conversation because they set themselves up for this story because they didn't meet us early enough, or they didn't meet us when it would have had a bigger impact. However, had they met us earlier, would they have listened?
Possibly not.
more often than not, right? More often than not, people are not ready to hear it until they're ready to hear it. So it's important that we say these things really confidently and let people know that we exist, which is why myofascial magic has been such a revelation in the industry. And it's going to continue to grow because we ask the question about reality. It's not another metaphor. It's not another stepping stone of where we're going. We're just going to the very edge of what we know and explaining it as well as we possibly can.
So if someone was in these feedback loops and they weren't willing to listen, would the primary tool you give them would be the breath? Take a deep breath, even to assess the awareness of the body?
I always start with breath to let them know that they're not. So it's always accompanied by a very challenging position because it's relative to where they are. So for instance, if they're in my studio, it's a 101, they're doing the ab work, for instance, let's put them in somewhere that they're familiar. And then I put my hand on their chest and I lean on them. Now I've taken their ability to breathe away. I put pressure on their volume that they're not moving. They are over pressurizing to achieve the abs and the sensation of achievement through excessive sensation, but they're not, which is why they've got a bad back, or they've got a hip issue, or they have cervical issue, or whatever they've come to me with. I want to exaggerate that.
Yeah, changing the pressure system. I love that.
And then I go, okay, so now make my hand move, but with breathing. And all of a sudden they go, what? I said, you have to make my hand move and the pressure I'm imposing upon you with your breath. Because your lifestyle, your movement choices, I am now just animating them with the pressure of my hand. But they're on you all day because look at people's form and shape that they're presenting with. It's always excessively compressed anteriorly, yes, generally, where they're not able to expand properly. They're not able to utilize their volume efficiently. So I put them in positions of failure and show them how to succeed because you've got to get the quick win. And once you have their attention, then they're willing to do the subtle. For instance, another good one with men, they like to bench press. But why would you lie on your back to push a car above your chest? When would that ever happen? And immobilize your scapula. That's another story. So I just make them do press-ups. But I sit on them. I put weight on them. Like they're lifting the weight, I go on their back. I make it impossible for them. And then I make them make it possible by introducing breath. And now they go, oh my God, the breath has such a powerful influence. And I say, of course it does. Like we know this, but you weren't aware of this capability because you've never utilized it. It's not a normal contributor to your movement. Most men have hemorrhoids because they weight train and brace a lot because that pressure must come out of somewhere. Women tend to be incontinent, generally tend to be incontinent at some stage because of excessive pressure. And they're trying to attain these great looks. And it's fantastic to have these great figures, but they're not walking. They're not moving. They're just over-pressurized skeletal systems. And that pressure must come out somewhere. Then it generally comes out of their groin.
One thing that you speak about in MMIA, and also something that blew my mind, is when we rotate, if we turn our head in the same direction, we downward spiral. And
Yes.
if we rotate and move our head in the opposite direction, we upward spiral.
Yes.
Does that contribute to the pressure volume?
Of course it does. Exactly. So think, like I said, anything in nature wants to come to the ground. Yeah. For instance, remember, once upon a time, we used to look after our shoulder to see who was there. Where was the danger coming from? What direction did it need to go? And we look on purpose. But when you look over your shoulder, you don't stand tall and do it. You look and duck, because that is a neurological necessity. Yes? So as you turn, you come down. Your spiral always spirals downwards. Always. The nature of the bones do that. And you'll prefer to do it one way over the other. However, there's a process, and this came from Jaap van der Wal's work from 1985, no less, right? Which was not shown to the world till 2009. And it's called dynaments, dynamic ligament tensioning. And this is where ligaments don't go slack in movement. They tension, yes, in series, in continuation with everything. They don't run parallel to the side. And as you turn one side goes taut and the other side goes slack, as was previously thought. And what that means is when you turn your head in one direction and your ribs in the other, we get chirality. We get counter-rotating spirals. And what that does as that happens, your bones separate and they pull and dynamically tension the ligamentous tissue between them. And that gives you incredible power and elasticity in motion. So instead of you turning around and spiraling down like you grind peppercorns, they go the other way, that you're lifting a lid off a bottle. And you're separating the two elements that make a bottle. Well, that's happening between each and every one of your vertebrae. So it's very important that the two movements are completely necessary. It just depends on the situation when you use one or the other. But if we're walking forward, I need my head to go the other way to my ribs so that I walk upright and I walk forward and can change direction. But if I need to turn around, I need to look where I'm going. So I look over my shoulder, I will spiral down, which allows you to pivot like a spring tensioned frog. You turn and you spring up. Makes sense? And so changing direction should not make you trip over. But most people trip over because they don't look where they're going. As an anticipatory effect, pre-testing the architecture to change direction properly.
Makes so much sense. And I want to touch upon what we were speaking about just before I press record. This idea, one of the exercises in MMIA, you have us stand up against the wall, the bum is touching the wall, and then we slowly roll down. And you say it in the video, and Joanne also said it in the video saying, this is really tough. And I was like, this is going to be easy for me. And so I started to roll down. I'm like, oh my God, systems that I haven't used in my body are starting to tremble and shake. I can't utilize what I normally use. So how, when we change shape or do things that we don't normally do, how does that affect the body, and what kind of automatically turns on for us?
We're biased to habits, aren't we? So in our body, I say this, and I'm going to say this, there are no muscles, there are no bones, there are no nervous system, there are no organs until we separate them and talk about them individually. And you do that in a very specific context to have a conversation on purpose about a particular element. But in a living human that is moving, all of those things we talk about in isolation collaborate together, whether you like it or not. Like, for instance, there is no lines in the body, fascial lines, because we're non-linear. We're a round thing. But again, people want to feel like they're working their back posterior chain or the front deep spiral line. Whatever name you're coming up with to explain what you're sensing and feeling is valid to you, but it's not true. It's just a really good story you're telling yourself. And what this positional experience shows you is that it's not true. Because when you put yourself in a position where you can't go to biased, you have to address the inhibition you're creating and harboring and owning and then tucking and hiding away, that you have to address it. So that particular movement opportunity is to make you go, oh my God, I would typically fall to the floor, or I can easily hinge at my hip. And it's not that hinging is terrible. It's just done terribly by most people. You should be able to hinge and do anything with your body. There's another key principle. All bones should be able to move at all times during all motions, in motion. But like we go back to the core, like we go back to the spine, the column, like we go back to breathing, like we go back to any of the things we spoke about, if you get yourself in a position where the bones have become immobilized and you're still in motion, that pressure is going to become inappropriate and you're inviting dysfunction and pathology and injury to arrive. So it's important that motion against the wall, it teaches you what you don't know and then makes you completely aware of what you've been avoiding or what you now have the ability to address and encapsulate back into the very unique asymmetrical architecture you are. And it's a brilliant way of doing it. Again, it's a fail safe, right? You either succeed or fail. And either way, you're learning. And if you are learning and you're very good at it, we can make it much more challenging. We can increase the complexity. But if it makes you fail and makes you go, oh my God, how do I even begin? Then we can even reduce it further. We can micromanage it back to when you can be successful. And it's about learning about how the bones never want to clash. We do not want to let compression win ever. And it's always about accessing that dynamic ligament tension throughout the whole body, where the virtual spaces, like we see on an X-ray, are always sustained. And in that flexion from the wall and then back to extending to vertical, if you collapse into those virtual spaces, you fall over. If you maintain those virtual spaces, you create dynamic ligament tensioning by the very nature of how you're going about it. Your breath will be enhanced and the quality of it will be more useful to you, and your movement will become more skilled and capable over time. But at first you'll fail because it'll make you aware of something you weren't aware of, that you're not good at moving. You're reliant on a movement style that you have become over familiar and have overutilized.
Yeah, I love it. It comes back to your jujitsu training of figuring out different patterns and investigating different variations to help support your body and your movement.
Exactly. Like, why on earth would you want to stand with your hip distance apart anyway? Your feet hip distance apart. Like, but so then try the same movement with a staggered position. I mean, your legs will move differently. Your pelvis will go, oh my God, I like this configuration, or I don't. Can I switch the legs the other way around? And then your body will start to move. I personally, you know this, I rotate to the left all day long. I have a complete bias to rotating. I can turn left literally to 9 o'clock and beyond on the left, but I can barely move off center. I can't get to 1 o'clock on the right unless I compromise a relationship first to exaggerate and get around that limitation and inhibition that I've created through my own habitual movement on myself over a lifetime of using it. So knowing how to invite adaptation, which is always happening, but invite a positive adaptation that will give me a positive change, which gives me more longevity of using myself. That's the way I would encourage people to go in the micro, rather than keep challenging the threshold of the macro, which will ultimately bring them to a halt. Because once you get to the body's limitation of adaptation in the negative, you then injure yourself. And what's really good is it's unlimited, the possibilities of going in the positive. Like, you can always change for the better, always. But there's definitely a limitation of the negative, which is why we see our sporting clientele, they all retire and stop doing the thing they love doing because of the way they did the thing they love doing the most, to extreme. Instead of going, I just paid a bit more attention to rewarding my body for performing more frequently and didn't wait till it accumulated this limitation, which ultimately leads into the cessation of being able to do it at all, then they would be much more happy, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I think you said this in another interview or in the class itself when you said athletes sacrifice their body.
But
They know going into
entertainment.
injury. Yeah.
And the thing is, that's the problem, that everything when they say science-based evidence, that's true. But evidence is only as good as the science that revealed it. And all science is, and it's incredible, but it's only an invitation to understand something. It's not a dictator saying you can only do it this way, because science is really fallible. It disproves itself all the time, which is why it's so good, because it allows you to ask questions you didn't even know existed. But what we certainly know is the vast majority of the healthcare and the medical care industries base the approaches to longevity and healthy movement of the population of the world on the short-term successes of the elite athletes. because they're the ones that you can do data on, because they're containable. You can monitor them more precisely. And when we use that data on a population that can't move and can't perform like where the data was attained, that's misleading. Because remember, we're spectators of our stars. We want them to do well. We want them to exceed our expectations for entertainment, like modern day gladiators. And when they get rubbish and they get injured, we say thanks very much and we cheer. And there'll never be another Pele, but there is. And another person comes along who is equally as talented, but younger, and takes their place. And we always keep being entertained by our sporting stars. And here is who we aspire to perform like. Some people will get close to it, other people will go towards it, and other people will only ever watch and admire them. But all of our work and our long-term aspirations of our own health shouldn't be based upon them. It should be based upon our population, wherever you sit within it.
I agree wholeheartedly. I just want to go back to what you said about hip distance apart, because this was, I think, the first class I entered into MMIA. And I remember you saying, don't put your feet hip distance apart. And because I'm a good yogi, I was like, have to be hip distance apart. And I remember as I started to bring my feet a little bit closer together, my whole system became unstable. And that was the first question I had asked. Whoa, something really changed just by moving my feet slightly closer together. And I remember you saying, of course, you've changed your ground, what you're stepping on, and how your foundation of your balance.
This is the thing, isn't it, Natalie? And I don't think most people know this because, again, what they commonly see in this fashionable, wide is better, wide is stronger. And that's true. It is true to be wider, it is stronger. However, it's not useful sometimes at the expense and sacrifice of being able to balance. So one thing we know for certain, falling is inevitable. We'll always fall over. We've had this conversation already. We're going to fall to the ground. So knowing that you should be an expert at balancing as a human being and moving on one leg, from one leg to another leg in this unilateral way, yes, in multi-directions, it's very important that we become experts at it, not reliant on wide bases to give us our confidence and faith in that we're not going to fall. Because how are you going to move from a wide base? You have to lift one leg off eventually to change direction.
Yeah,
if you lift one leg off, you have to move across. And what will happen is that foot on the floor will end up underneath your groin, which will be above, so that you balance, so you can change direction. So straight away, your body goes, I need to reorganize myself to become capable to move, rather than reliant and familiar on the safety and the complacency that's come from that misleading approach of wide bases are important. And where did hip distance apart come from? If you look at any skeleton that we all learned anatomy on, because they're dead and they're the remains of the dead, they hang vertical and the legs hang straight down. They do not animate how they are on any living creature. And on any living creature, they move and they turn and they spiral and they rotate across each other. And actually your femurs are going to be on a diagonal angle like this. They never hang vertical unless they're dead and they've got a pole shoved up their dead butt. And now it's a skeleton that we've created that does not exist in any environment other than an anatomy class. So we should look at these skeletons and we should look at the historical effects of that person's movement and go, wow, look how the bones have gone through morphological changes, and informs us of what not to do. We shouldn't use skeletons of how to move. And that's different. Again, it's understanding what the skeleton is giving you, how it's informing you of how to explain anatomy to an audience that doesn't understand physiology. And I think it's misled an awful lot of people for too long.
I love that. The one thing that stays in my mind is how you in the class were saying almost nobody walks properly anymore, and how it's so important to rotate and spiral when you walk, because if you walk also with your wide legs, you're not bringing the energy into your body.
You walk like a duck, don't you? If you walk like a duck and a penguin, you quack like one. The thing is like this, people will move how they want to move, and that's cool for them. But remember, if things move in straight lines, you create shearing. Shearing creates inflammation, and inflammation creates pathology. We are a round thing, and your legs, yes, especially in the hip, it's a round head of femur and a round acetabulum. Do you know what acetabulum means?
Oh, the actual etymology word? No, I don't know what
it means vinegar bowl.
Okay. Oh,
Looks like a bowl. Makes sense. So now you know it's a bowl and it looks like it should do this, yes? How can it do that if my feet are wide?
Mm.
It can only shuffle, which then creates, and remember, it's a self-lubricating region. However, it only lubricates what you move.
Mm.
So if you don't circle around, then the area you're not utilizing and stimulating the secretion of synovial fluids dries out. Only the area of movement and the direction of movement is hydrated and made sure that it has secretion and lubricants to allow that to occur, which is why you now end up with bone spurs and you end up requiring a new hip. Whereas if you rotate, and the only way to stimulate rotation is do walking on the plank, because you have to rotate around yourself to stimulate that. Whereas if the feet are wide, you just shuffle.
Yeah, the metaphor comes to mind. If we're always in the external, how are we even moving into the internal?
Exactly. And lateral feels good because it gives you more room to move within. We are laterally biased people. That's cool. We need to know how to access our bias and our capabilities. This is good. But again, it's understanding the characteristics of our body. And it's like having a personality. If you can access an element that suits that particular given situation, that's perfect. However, sometimes you need to reduce that space. You need to add a constraint to the space. So you maintain more control. So you can come immediately, but you can, of course, go lateral if you want to change direction. And it's understanding why we are configured in certain ways and why we've lost the ability to access certain configurations, which leads people to the situations they find themselves in. And our job is just to give them back and say, if you do this, you will help yourself restore different characteristics, which will allow you to access different movement options. However, some people will have lost that transformative effect because it will have already adapted to beyond its ability to transform back. And that's very important that people understand that they're not machinery. You can't fix a part of a body and then reintroduce it and go, now the body's fixed again. Because the whole body is always going through transformation of everything at all times. So if you're having a poor movement style at your foot or your hip, that's having a global effect throughout your whole body. You heard us say this, the talus structure, which is in the ankle, for us is the crown jewel of the whole body, because how it moves and performs determines how everything all the way up to your eyeballs reacts and responds, good, bad, or ugly. So knowing how your foot should undulate in all directions all of the time as often as it can is what gives you the ability to walk and stride confidently in any direction and any environment you'd like to take part in. But often we limit that option, which has a global impact further away. And all of a sudden, now you've got a shoulder issue or you have a pelvic floor issue, and nobody relates it to how they use their feet. They want to address the victim that's become the victim and go, oh, let me fix my shoulder. And you go, but it's not your shoulder's fault. Are you moving your shoulder inappropriately? Yeah, sure. But can we improve your foot organization and sequencing through your pelvis that pressurizes the body and makes you float within yourself so the arm can move more freely again? And that's when I go around and do all these live events and I'll see someone with an issue and all I'll do is I will compress that pelvis and the shoulder will move completely free and pain-free. And how did you do that? And I go, because I know you're not a series of bones and muscles. You are a volume, yes, of fluids. And your fluids have descended and crashed to the bottom. And everything is falling down. But you're still expected to lift up. But if I create pressure, like fluid, like water in a bottle, and I push at one end, that pressure pushes the volume upwards. And everything in that pressurized fluid organization and that liquid matrix must float higher. And all of a sudden, all the bones stop colliding and your arm moves freely.
It makes me think of the example that you gave earlier. There's fear and we collapse into ourselves and there's no one around to re-volumize us, the breath. And if we have no access to it, we stay collapsed. And so the breath will reorganize our volume and our pressure. I have one last question. It's about the pelvic foot. So you spoke about the pelvis, spoke about the foot. In MIA, you speak about the pelvic foot quite a bit. And I would love for you to explain a little bit more about it.
I'm happy to. A long time ago, I was introduced to two very important people in my education, Leon Chaitow and Dr. Nell Galloway. Leon Chaitow, everybody knows, is a world-famous osteopath, and he taught me about the relationship of the foot and the leg and into the pelvis and the lower spine. Yes? And then it carries on all the way up to the jaw. So we were always taught to assess globally. So whatever area in the body had become a victim and there was trauma or insult or pathology, yes, that needs addressing, but why has it become the victim of poor force transmission or poor movement patterns that have challenged that area inefficiently and inappropriately? And then I met Galloway, and he was doing a talk, and he's a bladder specialist. And what he would do, he would restore integrity to things that have prolapsed out of women. And his whole conversation, when I was talking to him, was about, and he did it on stage, and then I had a private conversation, thank God, and then many after that, was about how he returned tensegrity to somebody's pelvis, because before he did surgery, before he took the knife to their pelvis to go in to address the prolapse, whatever that might be, he would ask them to take their shoes and socks off. And what he found was the ankle is a mirror of the ipsilateral hip that he was about to cut. And I'd already been doing this because of my work with Leon, but I didn't understand why I was having such great work. I didn't understand why I was having lots of girls coming with pelvic floor issues, classical pelvic floor scenarios that they were having addressed with Kegels and other standardized rehabilitative approaches. And they were not getting the successes they wanted. Like there was some success, but it wasn't resolving. And I said, because of my background and my work in neuromuscular therapy, we got to improve their foot organization, because that's where all of the energy is coming from the ground and how you're distributing it through you. And if I address the foot, it will directly affect your pelvis. Because remember, your foot grew from your pelvis. Your big toes and your foot, like a limb bud, like a bud on a branch off a tree, grows from the trunk. Your leg at the limb bud grows from your sacrum. So as it grows and develops to become a foot, become an ankle, to become a leg, to become a thigh, to become the limb, yes, it has a direct relationship to the pelvis. And each of your legs is completely different to the other one, and they have different strengths and capabilities and characteristics. They're not the same because we're not symmetrical. So I developed this whole workout about how to make sure the ankle and foot performed incredibly well, and made sure that first and foremost, people met me online, yes, or I had a conversation with them, and then they went home, and they had to learn how to let go of trying to hold on. They had to learn how to let things happen. Because the more they're holding on, the less chance you can help re-educate and reorganize and teach them about dosage and intensities so that the pelvis becomes more capable. So they had to learn to let go. That was a big step. And coming from a guy telling a woman to do that, they were a bit like horrified, but they were like, Jesus, my sex life is rubbish. I can't go to work. I go and shop. And these were women in their 20s and 30s. These were not the older women that you'd expect to have incontinence issues. And once you address one, what happens is they tell their friends. And oh my God, in the community, all of the friends have got something. And they go, who's the person you've gone to? And all of a sudden I became the person to go to for it. It was driving me mad. This is not what I was advertising. One success leads to another, and it was all fun. And I learned a lot. So then when I read Niall's book and I chatted to him and I asked questions, I realized that this is important. So then I created the pelvic foot workshop. And nobody else is doing it. People are talking about the pelvic diaphragm. People are talking about the pelvic this, pelvic that. But your foot is what stimulates how your pelvis responds.
I have so many questions.
I think of the thighs that rotate. If you rotate fabric, you tension it, yes? If you take all of the pants you're wearing, take all of the right in the middle of your femurs and do this, you'll tension pull it. And the inside of your thighs will go firmer. The fabric will go firmer. That's your groin. You rotate that constant like this, but imagine you turn out and you slacken it. You let it relax. Look at the fabric in your pants. It will be all loose between your legs. There'll be no tension in the fabric of the trousers you're wearing if you stand and turn out. Just loose. And then now you've got to perform these squats and lunges and all this other cool stuff. But your pelvis is the fabric of your body is equally as unstimulated and doesn't have the right combination of those compression and tensional forces to harmonize integrity. All because of the direction your foot and thigh are rotating in bias.
So it's about bringing proprioception consciousness to the foot and the ankle.
If you can take the focus away from the area that is functioning in, firstly, that's a big leap. But once they go, okay, I'm sick of dealing with this pelvis, whatever issue, if I can focus on something else, and then you see the dramatic change in their confidence and the outcome of the tissue healing itself, and you see how it becomes less dysfunctional and becomes more capable of controlling bladder issues, pelvic issues, incontinence issues, strength issues, breathing dysfunction, you name it, the whole thing changes. Because the better the foot moves, the better the body will respond to moving.
I love that. Thank
Pleasure.
you so much, Paul.
Pleasure.
Yeah, this was an unbelievable conversation. I'm super excited for my listeners to hear it all and understand that if they have incontinence issues, to go see you right away.
Oh my God. Oh,
I'm just
no.
kidding. Thank you again so much.
Thanks for inviting me, Natalie. And hello to everybody out there. And if you want any further information, reach out to us at myofascialmagic.com. It does challenge what they consider they know, and that's good. We want to shake their boat of what they think to be true, so they come out much more comprehensively educated about what they need to know on the basis of how they're going to share that knowledge with other people. So it's for all professional movement and therapists.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Paul.
Pleasure.
Speak to you soon.
Take care.